Well, it's a sunny day here in Alaska, and it's particularly warm. The sun has been getting out and melting snow, so you hear drops in the background. And I'm standing out here by the bird feeders, so occasionally a chickadee is going to come by and visit. I've been thinking a lot about myself 17 years ago in churches where I was surrounded by ever-growing numbers of divorced and remarried people. And I just didn't know what to do. They were usually the most active. They were usually the most willing to volunteer. They were usually the people who did not take for granted the preaching the gospel to the lost. They were usually the best evangelists. I was just consistently amazed at how good they were at preaching and just explaining things. And it wasn't like these were, a group of people with green skin and you could spot a mile away. But they were definitely a category of people that could talk about divorce and remarriage, but you could not talk to them about it. So it was quite a strange situation where, they would talk about it in a way that excused it in the sense that, hey, I've gone through this, here's where I'm at. And it wasn't, well, what do you think? It was, this is where I'm at. Don't walk in this minefield because I'm quite sensitive about it and I'm tired of being beat up about it. And that to me was always just a red flag because there was no other sin that I had ever seen in someone's life that had that category. Hey, I murdered somebody, but don't you ever talk to me or ask me about that. And, I've heard some preachers preach on it occasionally and kind of try and make a testimony out of it, how, the Lord brought new couples together that, that had been in an abusive relationship, and now God has magically washed all that responsibility away that came from a divorce and marriage situation. And I get it, my folks were divorced and remarried, and it was exceedingly painful always going to the courthouse debates for who's I was going to spend time with. And I was sure glad when my dad got married to his, I don't know how many wives he's had, but he got married to a woman that was just fantastic mother. And I really enjoyed, working with that situation. She was way better than my birth mother. And so, I get it. I totally makes sense. But when you read scripture and you see what Jesus, how serious he took this and how much he talked about it in a proactive environment, rather than in, hey, I'm divorced and married, so, don't anybody look at me sideways. He talked about it in a way that, made the disciples say, well, if it's this case with a man and a woman, it's better not to be married. I mean, they were shocked at how much he hated divorce and remarriage. And I don't even think at that point they were fully convinced about Jesus. They were still kind of checking him out. They were glad to be his disciples. They were glad to see the demons kicked out and people healed. But teaching like this, really? Are you serious? And so I think they themselves had a hard time accepting it. By their very reaction, it proves so. But all through the book of Acts, we do not see a single situation where there's a divorced and married person that is working with Paul, Peter, any of the apostles in the character list in Acts. And nor do we see it in 1 Peter, where he talks about living with an unbelieving spouse and submitting to him. That would have been the perfect time for Peter to say, but if you're not getting along, divorce or marriage is fine, because then you can get married to someone that you can live in peace with. So anyway, my point in trying to bring it up is that Jesus talked about it in a way that was helpful, in a way that was talked about. And so if you're a situation like I was 17 years ago, and you're surrounded by people that are divorced and remarried, and it seems like it's growing more and more, and you might not even know these people terribly well. They might be kind of just people that you've adopted as friends in the church that you're going to. Or maybe you're thinking about it yourself. I don't know. But 17 years ago, that was the situation I was in, and it just seemed like it was a never-ending drone of people that were getting divorced and remarried, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. And so if you're in that situation, take a look at some of what David Pawson has to teach. David Pawson talks a lot about divorce and remarriage, and he does it in a very helpful way. He does it in a way that I think Jesus talked about it, and it was serious, and people could interface with him and ask questions like what we see the Pharisees do and the disciples. And so it was a healthy discussion about a super serious subject. So serious that in every single one of the lists that we see of sin in the New Testament, adultery and fornication are always at the top of those lists. So it is something that Jesus is saying is powerful. It is something that is far-reaching in its implications to kids, neighbors, relatives, community at large. Suffers greatly when divorce and remarriage happens. And so try and listen to what David Pawson has to say. And then I disagree with the outcome that Mike Wanger and Adam from Team Jesus Preachers comes with, but they spend such a great attitude towards the whole discussion that it's worth listening to their points of view so that you can learn what people are thinking. And hopefully if you're married, listen to it with your spouse and say, hey, this is what could happen to us if we take this relationship lightly. And these are some of the pitfalls that would be excuses that the devil would put in our minds to go through. So anyway, Mike Wanger has my respect in his discussion, and same with Adam Team Jesus. But I would definitely counsel someone who's struggling and they ask me for advice to listen to David Pawson and would say that, yeah, this is a sin. This is something that could be repeatable sin. If someone's in murder and they stop murdering, then they have ceased being a murderer. But if someone is living in adultery and they continue and sleeping with someone that's not their husband or wife, then that would be continued adultery. So, simple-minded me, that's where I'm at. And I just look at the scripture for the last 30 years, and even when I was in churches that fully preached an acceptance and married people that were divorced and remarried, it never made sense to me. And I did not have luxury in my early Christian life towards books. I wasn't the best reader of books, and I wasn't the best at buying Christian tapes. And so David Pawson only became available to me, 3-4 years ago, at the most, 4 years ago. So I didn't know what people were preaching. And, there was a couple people that had books that I read and plowed through and forced myself to read. But for the most part, I'd encourage you to not take this lightly. As I think if I could talk to myself 17 years ago, if you put your head in the sand and just ignore this, then it will develop and grow, and I'll be culpable and responsible for other people making decisions that might not be the best. But at the end of the day, it is other people's decision. I can give them suggestions. I can't give them commands. That's the Lord's job. And at the end of the day, if someone wants to lie and cheat and steal, and I've told them that, hey, those are sins that 1 Corinthians 6:9 says, be not deceived. Don't you know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of heaven? And same thing with divorce and remarriage. It is, don't be deceived. There are many things that will keep people out of the kingdom of heaven. And so figure that out. And, so I'm just trying to help and being benevolent and kind, speaking the truth in love so that we can grow up into him who's the head. So I think that's where I'm going to end, is that discussions like this need to be like what Jesus did. He talked about things. He didn't just ignore things, even difficult things. So hopefully this is helpful. Check out David Pawson's, Mike Wanger, and Team Jesus Preacher, Brother Adam. All right. Lord bless you guys.